Everything you believe about the stars was built on a single lie. They are not eternal fires hung by the gods to light the darkness. They are the scattered tears of a weaver who dared to challenge heaven itself, frozen in their fall, suspended forever between earth and the realm of the immortals. It began in the village of Muong Tan, in the time when the mountains still remembered how to speak, with a girl named Lin whose fingers could coax silk from starlight and whose pride burned brighter than any constellation. Listen, listen carefully, for this story comes from the days when the world was younger and more dangerous, when gods walked among mortals wearing faces of mist and moonlight, when the boundary between what was and what might be remained thin as spider's silk. This is not a tale of easy victories or simple truths. This is a story of how the heavens themselves were changed, and why, on certain nights, if you look closely at the stars, you can still see the pattern she was weaving. In those ancient days, before the Trung sisters rode to war, before the great kings built their citadels of stone, there existed a village so remote that even its name has been forgotten by all but the oldest spirits. It lay in a valley where 3 rivers met, where the mists never fully lifted, where the rice grew thick and sweet, and where the people lived according to the old ways, offering prayers to the mountain gods and the river spirits, burning incense for their ancestors, and keeping the festivals with proper reverence. Among these people lived a girl named Lin. She was the daughter of weavers, born on the night of the full moon in the 7th month, which the midwives said was either the most auspicious or the most dangerous of times, depending on how the child lived their life. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, and her father, broken by grief, had taught Lin everything he knew about the ancient art of weaving before walking into the forest one winter and not returning. Some said he became a tree, others said the mountain took him. It did not matter. Lin was alone, but she had her loom, and she had hands that seemed to know secrets her mind had not yet learned. By the time Lin had seen 15 summers, her work had become legendary throughout the valley. She could weave cloth so fine it seemed made of morning dew. She could create colors that had no names, hues that shifted depending on the angle of light and the mood of the observer. Merchants came from distant cities, offering gold and jade for her work. She turned them all away. She did not weave for money. She wove because, in the movement of thread over thread, in the rhythm of the shuttle passing through the warp, she felt something she had never felt elsewhere. She felt whole. But this was not enough for Lin. Pride grew in her heart like a vine, beautiful and strangling. She began to believe that her gift placed her above others, that her talent was not a blessing to be honored, but a proof of her superiority. She looked at the other weavers in the village and saw only clumsy fingers. She looked at the farmers and the fishermen and thought their work beneath notice. She looked at the sky and thought, I could weave something more beautiful than the sunset. The gods notice such thoughts. They always do. One evening, as Lin sat at her loom, working by lamplight, a knock came at her door. She ignored it. The knock came again, more insistent. Irritated, Lin rose and opened the door to find an old woman standing in the threshold. The woman was bent with age, her face a landscape of wrinkles, her eyes clouded with cataracts. She wore rags that might once have been fine clothes, and she carried a walking stick carved with patterns that seemed to move in the flickering light. Please, the old woman said, her voice like wind through dry grass, I am cold and hungry. Might you spare some rice, perhaps a corner of your floor to sleep? Lin looked at the old woman with barely concealed disgust. I am working, she said. Go to one of the other houses. I have no time for beggars. The old woman's expression did not change, but something shifted in the air between them, like the moment before lightning strikes. I see, the old woman said softly. You are Lin the Weaver. Your reputation spreads far and wide. They say you are the most skilled weaver in all the land. Pride swelled in Lin's chest. They say truly. More skilled even than the weaver of the gods, Lin laughed, sharp and bitter. I have seen the tapestries in the temples. I could make better with my eyes closed. The old woman tilted her head, and for just a moment her clouded eyes seemed to clear, revealing depths that contained stars and darkness in equal measure. Bold words, child. Would you wager your skill against the divine? Without hesitation, Lin said. Name any competition, and I would emerge victorious. The old woman smiled then, and it was not a kind smile. Very well. Tomorrow night, when the moon rises full, go to the temple of Ngoch Huang at the mountain's summit. There you will receive your challenge. But be warned, young weaver, the gods do not appreciate those who claim equality with heaven. Before Lin could respond, the old woman turned and walked into the darkness, and though Lin watched, she could not see where the old woman went. One moment she was there, the next the street was empty, and the only sound was the distant barking of dogs and the eternal singing of the river. Lin closed her door and returned to her loom, but her hands trembled slightly as she worked, and she found herself making mistakes she had not made since childhood. She told herself it was fatigue. She told herself the old woman was merely mad, that tomorrow she would laugh at her own unease. But in her heart, in the deep place where truth lives, she knew that something had shifted, that invisible wheels had been set in motion, that her life had just changed in ways she could not yet comprehend. She did not sleep that night. How could she? Instead, she sat at her loom and wove, creating a cloth of such beauty that it seemed to glow from within, each thread a perfect complement to those around it, the pattern emerging like a revelation. When dawn came, she looked at what she had made and felt satisfaction surge through her. Let the gods see this, she thought. Let them weep at its perfection. The day passed in a blur. Lin ate nothing. She prepared offerings as was proper. Incense, fruit, rice wine, and as the sun began its descent, she dressed in her finest clothes, a tunic she had woven herself from silk, the color of twilight. She placed her most beautiful creation in a bag and began the climb to the temple. The path up the mountain was old beyond reckoning, worn smooth by countless feet over countless generations. It wound through forests where the trees grew so thick that even at midday the light was green and dim. It passed over streams that ran cold and clear, fed by sources high in the peaks where snow never melted. It climbed through territories where tigers still hunted and where the spirits of the forest watched travelers with eyes that reflected silver in the shadows. Lin had made this climb before, for the great festivals, but never alone, never at twilight. She felt the weight of unseen gazes upon her. She heard whispers in the rustling of leaves, voices speaking in languages that predated human speech. Twice she nearly turned back. Twice her pride drove her forward. By the time she reached the temple, the moon had risen, full and heavy and unnaturally bright. The temple stood alone at the summit, a structure of dark wood and stone that seemed to have grown from the mountain rather than been built upon it. Incense smoke drifted through the air, though Lin had seen no one tending the braziers. The great doors stood open, revealing darkness within. Lin stepped through the doorway and the world changed. The interior of the temple was not what it had been during the festivals. Instead of the familiar statuary and the altar with its offerings, she found herself standing in a vast hall that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. The floor was polished stone that reflected the sky, though how there could be sky inside a building she could not comprehend, and standing before her, seated on a throne that seemed carved from a single massive pearl, was a woman of such beauty that Lin's eyes hurt to look upon her directly. The woman's skin was the color of new cream. Her hair fell past her feet, black as the space between stars, and it moved, though there was no wind. She wore robes of clouds and starlight, and her eyes were the deep gold of amber, ancient and knowing. When she spoke, her voice resonated not just in Lin's ears, but in her bones, in her blood, in the marrow of her soul. Lin, daughter of weavers, you have claimed your skill surpasses that of heaven. I am Koa Hong, the weaver of destinies, she who sits at the loom of fate and threads the lives of mortals. Do you truly believe you can match me? Lin's mouth was dry as dust, but pride would not let her retreat now. She forced herself to meet those golden eyes. I believe that skill is skill, whether in mortal hands or divine. I have worked since I could walk. My talent is proven. If you would test me, I am ready. Something flickered across Koa Hong's perfect face. Amusement, perhaps, or pity, or something more complex than either. Very well. I will give you a task. Complete it before the next full moon, and I will acknowledge your skill as equal to my own. You will be granted a place in heaven, elevated beyond all mortals, your name remembered forever. You will weave alongside me, creating the tapestry of the world. And if I fail? Lin asked, though part of her screamed that she should not ask, should not tempt fate by acknowledging failure as a possibility. If you fail, Koa Hong said, and now her smile was sharp as a knife's edge, you will give to me what you value most. Not your life, Lin, not your freedom, but your gift. You will never weave again. Your hands will forget the knowledge they possess. The art that defines you will be stripped away, and you will live the remainder of your days empty of the thing that gives your existence meaning. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of divine truth. Lin felt her heart hammering against her ribs. To never weave again. To lose the one thing that made her feel complete. It was a fate worse than death. But the alternative, the vision of herself seated beside a goddess, creating wonders beyond imagination, acknowledged as the greatest weaver in all existence. This vision blazed in her mind like the sun. I accept, she heard herself say. Koa Hong nodded slowly. Then hear your task. You must weave for me a cloth that captures the essence of what it means to be human. Not their appearance, but their nature. The struggle and the joy, the nobility and the cruelty, the love and the hatred, the hope and the despair. You must weave what cannot be seen, but what defines everything. You must make visible the invisible. You have 1 month. With a gesture of her hand, Koa Hong produced a bundle of thread. But this was not ordinary thread. It seemed to shift and change as Lin looked at it. Now silver, now gold, now colors that existed nowhere in the mortal world. This is the thread of life, Koa Hong said. It is the only material from which such a work can be made. Use it wisely. You will receive no more. Lin reached out with trembling hands and took the thread. It felt warm, almost alive, pulsing gently against her palms. When she looked up to ask a question, the throne was empty, the vast hall was gone, and she stood alone in the ordinary temple, moonlight streaming through the open doors, the thread clutched in her hands, the only proof that anything had happened. She stumbled down the mountain in darkness, her mind reeling. What had she done? What had she agreed to? The task seemed impossible. How does one weave the essence of humanity? How does one capture in thread and pattern something as vast and complex as the human soul? But she had accepted the challenge, had wagered everything on her own pride and skill, and there was no turning back now. For 3 days, Lin did not eat. She did not sleep. She sat before her loom and stared at it, as if the wooden frame might offer answers. She tried 100 different approaches. She attempted to weave scenes of human life, farmers in their fields, mothers with their children, warriors in battle. Nothing felt right. These were images, surfaces, the skin of humanity rather than its essence. She walked through the village, watching people with desperate attention. An old man tending his garden with arthritic hands, still finding joy in the work. A young mother scolding her child for stealing sweets, love and frustration mingled in her voice. 2 friends laughing over shared rice wine, their bond invisible but more real than stone. Everywhere she looked, she saw the complexity she was meant to capture, and everywhere she looked, she despaired of her ability to translate it into thread. The moon waxed fat in the sky, measuring the passage of time with cruel precision. 10 days passed, 15, 20. Lin grew thin and haggard. Her hands, which had always been steady, developed a tremor. She began to pray to her ancestors, to any spirit that might listen, begging for guidance. None came. On the 23rd night, as Lin sat in her house with her head in her hands, ready to admit defeat, a knock came at her door. She almost did not answer. What did it matter now? But habit drove her to her feet, and she opened the door to find a figure standing in the darkness. It was not the old woman this time. Instead, she saw a man of indeterminate age, handsome in a way that seemed almost artificial, with eyes that sparkled with mischief and malice in equal measure. He wore the clothes of a scholar, but they were somehow wrong, as if he were acting the part rather than living it. He grinned at her, showing teeth that were slightly too white, slightly too sharp. "Lin the Weaver," he said, and his voice was smooth as oil, sweet as honey with poison at its heart. "You appear troubled. Who are you?" Lin asked, though some part of her recognized that this was no ordinary visitor. "I am called many things, the Wanderer, the Shape-Changer, the Trickster. Some know me as Sun Tin's shadow brother, the one who delights in chaos and possibility. I have watched your struggle with great interest." "Why?" Lin's voice was dull, defeated. "Because I despise the smug certainty of the ordered gods. Because I love to see the powerful confounded. Because you, in your arrogance, have created a delicious situation, and I would like to see how it resolves." He paused, his grin widening. "Or perhaps I simply wish to help. Motivations are such slippery things, don't you find? Can you help me?" The words escaped before Lin could stop them, desperate and small. "I can offer you knowledge," the trickster said. "Whether it helps is for you to determine. Tell me, Lin, what is the greatest human trait? What defines your kind above all else?" Lin thought about this, her exhausted mind struggling to focus. "Love," she said finally. "Or courage? Wisdom?" The trickster laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "All beautiful answers. All wrong. No, little weaver, the essence of humanity is this. You are the creatures who know you will die, and yet you build anyway. You plant trees whose shade you will never sit beneath. You tell stories that will outlive your bones. You love with full hearts, knowing that loss is inevitable. You reach for the impossible even though failure is certain. You are the only beings in all creation who embrace futility as a virtue." He leaned closer, and Lin could smell autumn leaves and smoke. "You want to weave humanity. Weave the space between certainty and extinction. Weave the defiance of the temporary against the eternal. Weave the beautiful stupidity of hope." Before Lin could respond, the trickster stepped back into shadow and was gone, leaving her alone with his words echoing in her mind. And suddenly, impossibly, she understood. For the next 4 days, Lin worked without stopping. Her fingers flew across the loom with a surety she had never felt before. The divine thread seemed to respond to her new understanding, flowing through her hands like water, like light, like possibility itself. She did not weave images of humans. Instead, she wove patterns that suggested motion and stillness, permanence and impermanence. She wove colors that shifted from hope to despair and back again. She wove threads that tangled and untangled, showing both the chaos and the order of human existence. She wove the mother's love that persists beyond death. She wove the warrior's courage in the face of inevitable defeat. She wove the farmer's faith in the turning seasons. She wove the scholar's pursuit of knowledge that will crumble. She wove the builder's pride in structures that will fall. She wove the lover's declaration despite the certainty of loss. She wove doubt and certainty, cruelty and kindness, creation and destruction, all the beautiful, terrible complexity of mortal life. And as she wove, she began to cry, because she finally understood what she was capturing, and in understanding it, she understood herself. Her pride had not been strength, but fear. Fear that without her gift, she was nothing. Her dismissal of others had been armor against the knowledge of her own fragility. Her arrogance had been a wall built against the truth that she was as temporary and uncertain as everyone else. On the final night, as the moon rose full once more, Lin completed the work. She looked at what she had made, and it was unlike anything she had ever created. It was not beautiful in any conventional sense. It was disturbing and magnificent, terrible and transcendent. It was a cloth that seemed alive, that seemed to breathe, that captured something true about existence in a way that mere representation never could. She carefully folded the cloth and began the climb to the temple once more. Her body was weak from days without food or sleep, and the path seemed longer than before, but she pressed on, driven by the knowledge that one way or another, her fate would be decided this night. The temple doors stood open. Koa Hong sat upon her throne, exactly as before, as if she had not moved in the intervening month. The goddess's golden eyes tracked Lin's approach with unreadable expression. "You return," Koa Hong said. "Show me what you have made." Lin approached the throne and, with hands that shook only slightly, unfolded the cloth before the goddess. The fabric seemed to glow in the strange light of that impossible hall, its patterns shifting and flowing like water, like fire, like life itself. For a long moment, Koa Hong said nothing. She reached out with one perfect hand and touched the cloth, and as she did, something changed in her expression. The divine certainty wavered. A crack appeared in the perfect facade. "This," Koa Hong said softly, "is not what I expected." "Is it sufficient?" Lin asked, and was surprised to find that she did not know what answer she wanted to hear. "Sufficient? Child, it is extraordinary. You have captured something I have spent millennia trying to understand. You have woven the paradox at the heart of mortal existence, the knowledge of futility combined with the refusal to accept it. This is a work of profound truth." She paused, and something like sadness flickered across her divine features. "Which is why I cannot let you keep your gift." Lin felt the words like a blade between her ribs. "What? But I succeeded. I completed the task." "You succeeded too well," Koa Hong said, and now her voice held a complexity Lin had not heard before, regret, perhaps, or something like it. "You have created something that should not exist. This cloth holds power. It shows gods what it means to be mortal, and in doing so it threatens the order of things. You succeeded at the task, yes, but in succeeding you have proven that mortals can touch divine truth, can create works that rival heaven itself. I cannot allow this knowledge to spread. I cannot allow you to continue weaving, to create more works that might further blur the line between mortal and divine." Lin stared at the goddess, understanding dawning like bitter sunrise. "This was never a fair challenge. No matter what I wove, you would take my gift." "Fair?" Koa Hong's laugh was like the ringing of distant bells. "Child, the gods are not fair. We are powerful. We are ancient. We maintain order not through justice, but through the inevitable weight of what we are." She stood from her throne, towering over Lin. "You displayed hubris. You claimed equality with divine skill. Whether you succeeded or failed, you would pay the price. The task was not a test of your ability. It was a demonstration of your place in the order of things." Rage, pure and bright, flooded through Lin's exhausted body. "Then you are a liar. You dishonor yourself with this deception." "Be careful," Koa Hong said, and now there was warning in her voice, the first hint of divine wrath. "You have lost your gift, but you still have your life. Do not press me further." But something in Lin had broken, or perhaps had finally been made whole. She thought of the trickster's words, of humanity's beautiful, foolish defiance in the face of certain loss. She looked at the cloth she had made, the work that had cost her everything, that had finally taught her the truth of what it meant to be mortal. "No," she said. The word hung in the air between them, impossible and irrevocable. "No." Koa Hong's voice was soft, dangerous. "You want to take my gift to prove that mortals cannot equal gods, but taking it proves the opposite. If we were truly so far beneath you, you would have nothing to fear from what I create. You take my gift not because I am inferior, but because you recognize that I am not." Lin reached for the cloth, and before Koa Hong could stop her, she began to tear it. The fabric resisted, but she pulled with all her remaining strength, and the divine thread began to part. As it did, something extraordinary happened. The threads that made up the cloth, freed from the pattern that bound them, began to rise into the air, glowing with their own internal light. They spread throughout the vast hall, multiplying, dividing, until thousands upon thousands of shimmering threads filled the space like stars. "What have you done?" Koa Hong whispered, and for the first time Lin heard something like fear in that divine voice. "I have freed my work," Lin said. "You wanted to contain it, to control it, to use it as a proof of your supremacy. Instead, let it spread. Let it remind everyone, mortal and divine, that there is power in defiance, that there is nobility in the struggle against impossible odds, that we are all caught between certainty and extinction, and our glory lies in how we respond to that truth. The threads began to move with purpose, flowing past the goddess who tried and failed to catch them. They streamed out through the temple walls as if the walls did not exist, out into the night sky, spreading across the heavens like shining rain. Lin watched them go, each thread a tiny fragment of the truth she had woven, scattering across the world. "You foolish child," Koa Hong said, and her voice held many emotions. Anger, yes, but also something that might have been respect, and something else that might have been relief, as if some part of her had tired of maintaining the absolute division between mortal and divine. "Do you know what you have done? Those threads will fall upon the world and change it. People will dream new dreams. They will reach for heights they never dared before. They will question the order of things. You have unleashed chaos." "Good," Lin said, and felt peace settle over her like a blanket despite her exhaustion. "Perhaps chaos is what the world needs. Perhaps the order you maintain is just another form of death." Koa Hong looked at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, the goddess laughed, and it was a genuine sound, free of mockery. "Very well, little weaver. You have your defiance. You have scattered your truth across the heavens. And yes, I will still take your gift, because I am a goddess, and I keep my word even when it is inconvenient. But know this, you have changed something tonight. What will come of that change, not even I can foresee." The goddess reached out and touched Lin's hands. The sensation was neither painful nor pleasant, merely absolute. Lin felt something fundamental drain away, felt the knowledge leaving her fingers, felt the certainty and understanding that had defined her entire life evaporating like morning mist. When Koa Hong withdrew her hand, Lin looked at her own palms as if seeing them for the first time. They were just hands now, just flesh and bone, with no special grace, no divine connection to the ancient art of weaving. "Go," Koa Hong said, not unkindly. "Live your mortal life, and know that what you created tonight will not be forgotten." Lin found herself standing outside the temple, the moon setting in the west, dawn beginning to paint the eastern sky. She did not remember walking out. Her legs trembled as she began the descent from the mountain. She felt hollow, emptied, as if the loss of her gift had left a void inside her that could never be filled. But as she walked, she looked up at the sky and saw the threads she had released. They hung among the stars, barely visible, a shimmer in the darkness, a pattern that suggested meaning without defining it. And she understood that while she could no longer weave with her hands, she had woven something larger. A message, a rebellion, a declaration that would endure long after her bones had returned to dust. The months that followed were the hardest of Lin's life. She could not weave. Her hands, when she tried, fumbled with the thread. The knowledge was gone, erased as if it had never been. She had to find new ways to live, to support herself. She worked in the rice fields. She carried water. She did the work she had once scorned as beneath her notice, and in doing that work, she slowly learned what her cloth had taught her to weave. The dignity of ordinary struggle, the quiet heroism of simple persistence. People noticed changes in the world. Artists began creating works of greater daring, touched by something they could not name. Farmers planted new crops, trying techniques that had never been attempted before. Young people questioned traditions that had stood for generations. And at night, when people looked up at the sky, they saw patterns in the stars they had never noticed before, subtle suggestions of meaning, as if the heavens themselves were trying to tell them something. There were whispers of a weaver who had challenged the gods. The details changed with each telling. Some said she had won, others that she had lost, others that the contest had no winner, only consequences. But always the stories agreed on one thing. The stars had been different since that night, touched by mortal hands marked by mortal defiance. Lin lived a long life. She never wove again, but she became a teacher. Passing on what wisdom she had gained, she taught humility but also courage. She taught respect for the divine, but also the importance of questioning, of reaching, of daring the impossible. She taught that there was honor in the attempt, regardless of the outcome, that the struggle against futility was itself a form of victory. On the night she died, surrounded by students who had become friends, who had become family, Lin looked up through the window at the stars and smiled. The pattern was still there, subtle but enduring, her one great work spread across the heavens. She had lost her gift, but gained something larger: understanding, compassion, and the knowledge that her defiance had mattered, had changed things in ways both small and profound. The trickster visited her as she lay dying, visible only to her. He grinned his sharp-toothed grin and spoke softly, so only she could hear. "Well played, little weaver. You lost the challenge and won the game. The gods are less certain now, the mortals more daring. You have sown chaos wrapped in beauty. I could not have done better myself." "Was it all your plan?" Lin whispered. "Did you manipulate everything?" The trickster's grin widened. "Does it matter? You made your choices. You cannot blame fate for the consequences of free will, nor can you claim free will absolves you of fate's demands. The truth is always somewhere in between, little weaver. Remember that, in whatever comes next." Lin closed her eyes for the last time, and her last thought was not of regret but of gratitude. She had lived. She had dared. She had touched something eternal, even if only for a moment. And her tears, frozen and scattered across the night sky, would remind the world forever that mortals could reach for the divine, even if the divine pushed back, even if the price was everything. The stars remember. They always will. On clear nights, if you know where to look, you can still see the pattern she wove, subtle, fragile, but enduring. A reminder that there is power in defiance, nobility in futility, and grace in the beautiful human impulse to build, to create, to reach for the impossible, even when we know that time and death will claim everything we make. This is the true story of the stars. Not lights hung by gods for mortal benefit, but the scattered fragments of a mortal's greatest work, stolen from divine hands and released into eternity. A weaver's final act of defiance, and a testament to the strange power that exists in the space between heaven and earth, between certainty and extinction, between what we are and what we dare to become. The story ends where it began, with the truth you did not know. Every time you look at the night sky, you are seeing the work of a mortal who dared to equal gods. You are seeing proof that the line between divine and human is not as absolute as the powerful would have you believe. You are seeing rebellion transformed into beauty, frozen in its eternal fall. Remember Lin, the weaver, who lost everything and gained immortality. Remember that the greatest works often cost the greatest price. Remember that defiance, even in the face of certain defeat, is itself a form of creation. Remember that we are all weavers of our own small threads, and the pattern we make matters, even if we never see its final form. The mountains still remember how to speak, if you listen carefully. The rivers still carry the old stories, and the stars, those scattered tears, those fragments of impossible defiance, still shine in the darkness, reminding us that once, long ago, in the time when the world was younger and more dangerous, a mortal woman wove something so true that the heavens themselves could not contain it. This is the tale as it was told to me, as it was told to my teacher, as it has been told since the night the stars changed. Whether you believe it or not matters less than what you do with the belief. The weavers still tell it to their daughters. The farmers still point out the pattern to their sons. The old remember and the young learn, and the story persists, like those threads scattered across the sky, fragile but enduring, mortal but immortal, a whispered defiance against the dying of the light. Listen. Listen carefully. Can you hear the shuttle moving through the loom? Can you feel the rhythm of thread against thread? That is the heartbeat of the world, and somewhere in its pattern, if you look closely enough, you will find the mark that Lin left, the proof that she was here, that she dared, that she defied, that she wove one impossible perfect truth before the gods took back their gift and scattered her tears across eternity. The story is ended. The fire burns low, the stars shine on, and somewhere in the space between heaven and earth, the loom is still moving, the pattern still emerging, and the divine weavers still pause occasionally to look at that subtle shimmer among the constellations and remember the mortal who taught them what they had forgotten, that the beauty of creation lies not in its permanence, but in the courage required to make it at all.